do you taste a wine that contains in every single bottle a trace of liquid from the day that it was first founded, possibly 2 centuries ago? Why did one man's debt of more than 2 billion euros very nearly destroy one of the world's oldest wine industries? And what happens to, or why does a Palo Cortada only appear in about 1% of all grapes pressed for sherry? Well, tonight you're going to get the stories and insider tips that answer those questions. And if you're watching this video on the replay, please, in the comments, type the word replay and let me know where you're logging in from. What's in your glass? What city are you located in? I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online food and wine pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate, fun-loving group of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, I'm live streaming this video for the first time on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, but it's based on a recorded conversation I had with our wonderful guest for my podcast, The Unreserved Wine Talk. I'll be jumping into the conversation as we watch it together, so let me know what questions you have. Get in there into the comments. Before I introduce our guest, let me just say that 2 of you are going to win a copy of his terrific book on sherry. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose 2 people randomly from those who contact me. Back to our guest. Ben Hawkins is the UK's leading writer and expert on both port and sherry. In 1963, he became the youngest recipient of the prestigious Vintner Scholarship, an experience that took him across Europe and to visit its vineyards and helped shape his lifelong passion for wine education, particularly as it relates to sherry and port. He is a prolific author and has written extensively for consumer and trade publications. His books include Rich, Rare, and Red, Real Men Drink Port, and ladies do too, thankfully, Sherry, and Adventures in the Wine Trade. He is a member of the Vintners Company and has lectured for the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, where he has also served as a trustee, an international judge, and public speaker. He has led vineyard tours across Europe and South America and promoted wine globally, including in the US and China. He is co-founder of the Royal Tokai Wine Company and a key figure in reviving Tokai Azu's global reputation. He joins us now from his home in London. Welcome, Ben. We're so glad you could join us here.
Thank you, Natalie. Very happy to be here.
Terrific, terrific. Now, you are the UK's foremost writer on both port and sherry. We're going to focus a bit more on sherry today. But in fact, your journey into wine started with sherry. You were the youngest person, as I mentioned, ever awarded the very prestigious Vintner Scholarship. And you write that you won the scholarship with a single word. Can you tell us about that situation, that scene?
Well, yes, I mean, it does sound rather odd, but remember, this is going back a long time, 1963, a lot happened that year. And I suddenly found myself sitting in the prestigious Vintners Hall, or the Vintners Company, and with an array of masters of the company, past and present. And I was sitting there to see if I could get this coveted Vintner Scholarship. Luckily, the master had a son who wanted to go to American University. I had just had a year at Amherst in Massachusetts, and so we talked about education. Not a word about wine at all. And suddenly, some dear old duffer, probably like me, said, "We better ask you a question about wine. Do you know how the solera system works in sherry?" Well, it is still a very difficult system, fractional blending, exactly what you said, to explain. So I simply gripped both arms of my chair and said, "Yes, I do." And he was so stunned and surprised. He said, "Okay," and that was it. That was the only question I had to ask about wine. Was yes. No written paper, nothing at all. Just one interview. It was just magic in those days.
That's great. You were only 20 years old. Would you have been able to explain it at that time?
Well, I would have stumbled, as I would stumble now.
Oh, no,
because
no, that's okay.
it's unusual in wine terms
Yeah,
what they do, as
yeah.
we'll discover later. But yes, exactly.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So, just for those who are not familiar with the Spanish Solera system, I'll just give a quick overview, and then you can jump in and correct me if I get what I get incorrect, wrong. It's a fractional blending system where sherry is aged in stacked rows of barrels, often called butts, Butts. When wine is drawn from the oldest barrels at the bottom for bottling, it's replaced with slightly younger wine from the row above, which in turn is topped up with wine from the row above that, and so on. So it's always the wine is shifting down. No solera is ever completely emptied, so every bottle of sherry contains a trace of wine from the day the solera was first started, meaning a bottle can carry the DNA of wines going back 1 or 2 centuries, which is amazing. But even better, I love in your book on sherry that you mentioned James Bond, the film Diamonds Are Forever. The actor Sean Connery tells M, his handler, that sherry is, quote, that the sherry they're drinking is an unusually fine solera, 51, I believe. And M retorts that there is no year for sherry. And Bond then explains he meant 1851, the original vintage on which the Solera was based. And I just think that's a gorgeously accurate, quietly pedantic piece of wine knowledge embedded in a major film. Now, you describe as well the Solera system as a miracle of sherry. Can you describe a moment when you tasted a wine and felt the magic of that Solera system at work in the glass?
Well, it all changes when you actually go to Jerez or go to Puerto Santa Maria or go to San Lucar, the three towns that make up the Sherry Triangle. And when you go there, you step inside these bodegas and you get this wonderful aroma of floor. And
What is
you realize
fleur? Like, maybe tell us a little
floor is
bit
a
about what that is.
yeast. It's a
Okay.
yeast which settles on the top of young wine. And
Right,
so
creates kind of a protective blanket.
absolutely, and that's why, Fino and Manzanilla, for instance, are always light, even though they could be 10, 12 years old. They still retain that very delicate light there. There is this extraordinary feeling that they don't, unlike Bordeaux, which you get new casks, new butts every vintage. Yeah, they never change the butts. They never change the casks. They're just there, and so you get this wonderful sort of feeling of. I mean, there's a classic occasion. I remember tasting in one bodega, Hidalgo bodega in San Lucar Verameda, and we tasted a Amontillado and a Palo Cortado. Uh, During the Peninsular War, that's going back over 200 years, the bodega producer sent the same sherry to Napoleon's army and the same sherry to Wellington's army.
Oh,
And
both
so
sides of the fight.
but exactly now the Wellington brand has been upgraded to Palo Cortado and the Napoleon to Amontillado. So that just shows how it goes back in history there. So yes, you just get this wonderful feeling that they're like cathedrals, these bodegas. So you get this sense of awe and height and space and air.
Right,
It's unlike any other wine producing region.
right. And they call them bodegas, these wineries, but they have the big open windows at the top and the
Big open
sea air is blowing
windows,
in.
absolutely though. And they're all above ground. It is very hot outside, as we know. You're very close or you're on the Mediterranean, on the southern end of Spain, just opposite Africa, and it's very hot there. And so there's lovely airy space there, and you go down and then the capitas will dip his Venencia, the sort of cup, through the floor and bring out the wine there. And there's something very magical about drinking sherry from the bodega, more so, I think, than drinking wine from other wineries around the world.
Huh, that sense of history. And you write that within each Solera system, that sort of organization of barrels, stacked barrels, the positioning of each barrel, whether by the window or an archway or against a wall, can alter the wine's character over time. So maybe give us an example of that. Like you tasted one, say, that was by an archway and one that wasn't, or something like that.
Well, these things sound awfully silly when we're talking. I mean, I'm in my office. There you are, and listeners are at home, hopefully having a sip of sherry or something. But you do sort of get this very strong feeling of history when you're there, and you can't take it away, and so it's just magical, I think. But the wind, definitely, you get the two winds. You get the Poniente wind coming from the Atlantic, a sort of dry wind, and you get the Levante coming from Africa, and so where it kind of hits the bodega, one coming, you remember you've got the Atlantic on one side, Mediterranean on the other. So where the wind does actually hit the cathedral, it does. And I mean, I have absolutely tasted the row about 50 butts. I go on one end, in the middle, at the end, exactly the same wine, and they did taste differently. I mean, now, could I tell the difference? No. There, but then I could. That's a magic of any tasting, any winery, isn't it? Of actually
Wow,
just being
yeah.
able to really taste the differences there, then and there.
Where you're standing, yeah, it really is a sensory that implants itself so deeply inside yourself. Now, you mentioned, you described tasting at Bodega or Winery Tradition, wines 40, 50, 100 years old, and your notes say thoroughbred, what length, winner's enclosure, ethereal, ring of powerful electricity, extraordinary. I love those tasting notes. You can really feel your
Well,
enthusiasm as
I
opposed to like 16 fruit types.
I know. Well, I've been through all that, I'm glad you enjoy that. I didn't kind of. It just came from my heart when I was talking
Yeah.
about these particular sherries. And I was asking, I was in Jerez like 2 weeks ago, and I was asking a friend of mine down there, to tell me more about it. And he said, really, it's a reduction that one's tasting. It's not the acidity, because the Palomino grape doesn't have much acidity. It's very light, soft grape. But it's a reduction, as over years in the various butts, that what evaporates is the water. And so the
Ah,
water evaporates over the years, over 10, 20, or whatever it is years. And so gradually, the what's left, the sort of alcohol, becomes more reductive. And so you're tasting that reduction there. And it kind of gets you in the back of your throat. And so it's totally unlike the two leading brands, Bristol Cream or Tio Pepe. It is, when you taste these wonderful Palcotados and Oroso Montilla, that's what you get. And to me, it was just like Frankel or any major wonderful horse just striding out, and just getting his nose over the finishing line, and that's how I then developed this completely unconsciously as a tasting it at that moment.
right. Now, reduction, sometimes we think of it as a fault, reduced, like sort of. Sometimes people think of it as swampy or something, but in this instance with sherry, it's a feature, a benefit. So
It's
what? How would
entirely
it's?
it's
Yeah,
entirely positive. Um,
right.
and I don't ask me why or how. I don't. But I mean,
Okay.
it just is entirely positive. Other people, I'm sure, have other ideas,
So
but
maybe
that
reduced means just more concentrated, more
it's
of
just in
itself.
this case, it means more concentrated, and
Yeah.
it's a taste of pure purity. So
Hmm.
it is not impure at all. I'm sure
Okay.
people have a view on that, but basically, that's the closest I've got to describing that kind of unctuous taste that you get in your mouth when you taste these lovely dry oak sherries.
Now, you describe the Aberritza soil of Jerez or sherry as sublimely chalky, able to absorb up to 34% of its weight in water, which is remarkable. And you explain that in the summer, this same white soil reflects the sun's rays onto the underside of the grape bunches, so it's warming and ripening them. And you trace that same chalk seam from Jerez across the floor of the English Channel to the White Cliffs of Dover, into the wine-growing counties of England, Kent and Sussex. I'm sure part of it is also Champagne's white soils. What plays more, or which one plays more of an important role in shaping sherry's character? Is it the soil or the solera system, or both?
Well, it's a cop out because it's a bit of everything. But just to be clear on this, is that if you look at Europe and you see Northern Europe, you get the Northern France being, I suppose, the sort of most well-known vineyards in northern France where champagne is produced. And you look at the southern part of Europe and you get to the Andalusia in Spain where sherry is produced. So you've both got white soil. So it's the white soil from Champagne that goes under the channel more and hits the English vineyards there. But what's interesting is that Champagne can be a still wine. I mean, it was up until about 100 years ago, but now, of course, it's more known as sparkling wine. So because the grapes and the soil weren't that good in themselves, you had to kind of create something which actually made it really special, champagne. Same thing in sherry is that because the Palomino grape is quite sort of gentle and soft, it doesn't actually produce great wine by itself there. You need to do something with it. And again, over the centuries, out came sherry fortified into sherry. But sherry is unique. I really think, although you've got the wonderful deep cellars in Champagne and all the rest of it there, but somehow it's the airy space of the cathedral like bodegas that does definitely give it. They call it the second terroir. The first terroir, obviously, is soil, but in the rest they call the second terroir is actually in the bodega. So it kind of goes through two terroir interactions, if that's not completely balmy.
Yeah, no, that's great. And like, this is very high level, but of course, port and sherry are both fortified wines, meaning there was more grape brandy or something sweet to get the higher alcohol level. Table wines clock in at about anywhere from 12 to 14% on average, but sherry and port are up toward, the 19 range. So what's the primary difference with sherry and port in terms of when the sugar is added or grape brandy and when fermentation stops?
Right. We've got the grape brandy is not sweet. It is natural grape brandy, so it's dry. It's natural and pure.
Okay.
So what you do in port, you stop the fermentation sooner, and that retains the sweetness in the must, which becomes the wine there. So you add 20% of bottled port is in fact grape brandy.
Right.
So you stop the fermentation, bingo, that's it. In a Jerez, it ferments naturally to about 12, 13. Then it again sometimes kind of and then at 15, that's where the Fina Manzanilla stop, and when the floor goes away, then it gets oxidized. Then you add more grape brandy to it up to about 18, 19 degrees there. So one is when you stop the fermentation, as in port, and then add the grape brandy, and in sherry you ferment out completely because obviously the grape's slightly sweet. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. So part of winning the Vintner Scholarship was a trip through Europe to visit some of the finest vineyards. In Jerez, you described the wineries or bodegas, as we've already talked about, as vast cathedral-like edifices, open windows, letting in the cool ocean breezes. You also saw the Los Mutilados, the mutilated Civil War veterans still in uniform. How did you feel seeing that image on the streets 25 years after the civil war in Spain had ended, alongside of, these Spain's great luxury wines?
Well, you put it very well. I mean, it's a long time ago, 60 years ago, Earth has changed. But kind of what hasn't changed is this wonderful, um, noble family feeling of Jerezzanos who make up the great sherry companies and much else as well. I mean, most of them got titles. They all speak English with a wonderful accent. And from the back of their throats like this, they all go like this, and it's very elegant and very elegant, and lots of friends of mine, who talk like this, and that's wonderful. So the sherry sort of royalty, if you like, are still there now. The Gonzales Bias, the sort of main lead people. But in those days, you're absolutely right. Mutilados were, they got one leg, one arm. We didn't really appreciate what they'd been through. We were 19, 20 years old when we all met down there. So, but it was looking back. It was it was a result of history. I mean, that's what they were. They didn't beg so much, but they did. They helped you park your car when you didn't need your car being parked. They still
Right.
do to this day in some way. So they would definitely sort of help you with their crutch, and so you then gave them a few pesetas. So it
Sure.
was it was definitely in those days. But then say it was London. I mean, all these cities really were pulverized by the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But 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 um, but there was a great contrast. Yes, of course there was huge
Yeah.
contrast.
Especially for you as a 20-year-old back then. So,
Yeah.
today, what do you think is the most misused tasting descriptor when people try to describe sherry wines? What is it that you think is?
Well, I think was lucky if people actually taste cherry wines. I mean,
Okay, let's get to
pe-
the
pe-
tasting first.
people kind of drink sherry as and they drink really the majority the cream sherries, Bristol cream,
Mm.
or
Hmm.
Croft Original, lighter cream sherry, which I helped evolve. Um, and then you get your Finos, your Tio Pepe and Lainas there. So people, because there's no vintage attached, people kind of, just don't sort of taste them in the same way as they taste new vintages of other wineries. So I think the most surprising thing that which I love is, good Lord, I didn't realize sherry was dry.
Ah,
When you look at
right.
a Amontillado or Palo Cortado that I've got here, and that is actually bone dry, and so all these sherry are bone dry, and so that's where we are, and what one is trying to do is to tell those few people in the world who are interested that if they have a great wine cellar, a great wine collector, it is not complete without some wonderful dry old sherry.
Well, researching this and your book made convinced me to get back to sherry, which I'm going to do
Good,
right after we talk.
good. Well, I've got a glass with me. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, good to represent there. So before we dive further, paint us a visual map of where Spain is on the European map for those who are fuzzy about this. Maybe the bordering countries, and where the sherry region is within Spain. You mentioned a triangle, but let's just situate where we're talking about.
Okay. Fun enough, tomorrow I'm driving down through France and staying with some friends north of the Pyrenees. So if you can picture France and the Pyrenees, and then you've got this sort of square peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, and that is Spain. And then Portugal occupies sort of 1/10 of the size or sixth of the size on the I always get east and west muddled up on the western side there. So that's where Spain is. Madrid's in the middle. Unusually for a capital city, it's not sort of by the sea or on a river. It's actually right in the middle of Spain. And Lucia is is the most southerly province, and Lucia is where the Sherry Triangle is, which is called a Sherry Triangle because it really it's legally where sherry can come from. You've got Jerez to the north, within about 10 miles, 15 miles, and then Sanlúcar, Barrameda on the coast, wonderful fish restaurants there, and then Puerto Santa Maria also on the coast. So that's where the triangle is there. So you're just sort of up from Gibraltar, and you're just inland from the Atlantic.
Okay. And for those who are listening, we keep saying Jerez, or like it's Jerez, Jerez. There's no J, like Jose. It's not
Like
Jose.
Jose, exactly. Jerez,
Yeah.
Jerez, Jerez.
Yes. And they say it like a TH on the end instead of the
Yeah.
Z, eh?
Jerez, Jerez.
Okay.
Jerez.
Okay. And how would the what? Sorry.
No, because the full title of you think Jerez as being a sort of village, it's in fact a city. And because it was one of the 6, 7 or 8 towns that helped keep the Moors south who were coming north, so that was a great. So it was bestowed the status of city, and de la Frontera, Jerez of the frontier, and there are various other hilltop towns who also have de la Frontera after their name there. So there's a wonderfully attractive part of the world. You must go there.
Yeah.
Have you been there?
Oh yes. No, I haven't. It's on
You
my
must
top
go
of my
there.
list.
Please. Yes. Okay, that's a date.
Okay.
That's a date.
Okay. I'll meet you there.
That's a date.
And so how large is the sherry region compared to, say, Rioja? And production-wise, too, what does it...
Well,
how's it compare?
gosh, Rioja in the north is about 10 times bigger than Jerez in the south. And I mean, this is the sort of story of sherry, is that it was until the 1960s, the hectares, I'll say in hectares if I may, was about 7,000 hectares. That's about just under 20,000 acres. So, and then, due to this extraordinary man, who we might talk about later, sherry volumes grew, and he planted a further 15,000 hectares. That's now 40,000 acres, which have now all been scrubbed up, and we're now back to 7,000 hectares. So that's where we are. So relatively small amount, but it's a very fertile piece of land, and so now a lot of the farmers were able, once they saw that there's no money in sherry, pulled up all the vines and planted crops, and they can actually get 2 tomato crops, 2 cabbage crops a year.
Okay.
So it's quite profitable for them.
So they can get more out of tomato crops than they can by selling wine?
Yeah,
Once a year?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
I'm afraid they can.
We're going to talk about the price of sherry in a bit, but let's just do a quick overview of the 6 styles of sherry for those who are not familiar. As you said, all made from the Palomino grape in southern Spain, ranging from bone dry to intensely sweet. The lightest and driest are Manzanilla from Sanlúcar de Barrameda that you mentioned, with its distinctive salty sea breeze character, and Fino from Jerez. Moving up in richness and oxidative character are Amontillado, which is nutty and amber colored, and the rare and mysterious Palo Cortado, which combines the crispness of Amontillado with the fuller body of an Oloroso. Oloroso itself, which is dark and fragrant and robustly dry, though often blended with sweet wines to make a cream sherry. And then at the sweet end, sits Pedro Ximénez. Oh, I can never get this. Ximénez's?
Pedro Jimenez. Pedro Jimenez.
PX, as the cool kids say.
Much easier.
Jimenez. Made from sun-dried grapes, which you described as a celestial treacle. I love that. Intensely dark, viscous, raisiny wine that is as close to liquid dessert as wine gets. So let's start with the lightest style, the finos. You arrived in Jerez on August 14th, 1963, within minutes of meeting the owners of the winery. I think it was Innocente. You were handed a glass of their fino, and you write that it's still your yardstick for finos today. What was it about that wine that transfixed itself in your memory?
Well, I mean, it sounds silly, but I can still remember that moment. It was the Innocente. And the great thing is Valdespino, although they've been bought up under a different ownership now, is they've still kept the label, they've still kept the brand name. And there's something very, when you haven't really been at home in England, we drank South African sherries, or we drank a sweet sherry at home, and it just was kind of there. It was just what everybody offered and what everybody asked for. So I'd never tasted anything quite so different and so refreshing. And I find now, I mean, I'm not involved financially at all in any sherry company, but I just have more pleasure now in just enjoying a glass of Fino or Manzanilla instead of white wine.
Oh,
I just find
okay.
there's slightly more to it. Okay, it's slightly more alcohol, 15% as opposed to 13, 14 sometimes, so marginal, drink
Sure.
less, And I just find that it just suits my palate. And so it just stuck in my mind and memory. There's this wonderful thing called Fino. Little that I know then that I get involved in a bigger way and then write a book about it, for goodness sake, 60 years later.
You never know where that first taste is going to take you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you write that the flor, which we've mentioned, is a naturally occurring film of yeast that spontaneously develops over the surface of sherry in the barrel, forms a protective layer, and gives Fino and Manzanilla their distinctive character. Describe the aromas of flors that waft in to your nose when you're entering the bodega. What does that tell you about the wine's character?
Well, it was a very good question, and which means that I'm not trying to answer it. Um, as they
Is
say
it
in the army,
ready?
as they say in the army, very good question. I'm glad you asked that. What do you think? Uh, but
You're back to your exam tricks.
so there's something bready, yes, but it doesn't. Nothing that I can find in normal explanation terms describes it. It's rather like, in a way, I've been thinking about it. It's rather like walking into into cathedral and just getting a sense of kind of I don't know, respect,
And awe.
um, awe. But there's more to that because obviously there's a
There's the
sensory
smell.
thing there. So
Yeah.
it's rather like going into walking in and not and seeing everything being clear or going through some kind of fog. And that fog is actually an attractive fog, and it kind of gets you. And and that of course is um, why you get this Enrama craze now going on.
And Rama? What is
Enrama.
that? What is that?
This is it's just been sort of the last 20 years. What they've been doing, and I'll try and be brief about this, but what they've been doing with the Fino Manzanilla, they really had to filter it and almost to keep it stable for a long time on the shelves in far-flung parts of the world. So it was almost becoming anodyne, the taste of Fino Manzanilla. And so in England, it's Gonzales Bias, I think, and they said, this is ridiculous. We know what people are buying as Fino or Manzanilla is not what you actually get in your cask, in your butt, in the bodega. So rather than fly out to Ereth, which would take, they calculate about 50 jumbo jets, they said, well, look, let's just twice a year when the floor is at its thickest and strongest kind of influence, let's bottle this wine without filtration, without stabilization, um, and that therefore traps more of the floor taste
Oh,
in the bottle.
okay.
So now a lot of bodegas do Enrama anyway, in that they don't sort of sanitize the product. But in Jerez, in Fino Manzanilla, if you see Enrama on the bottle, buy it.
Buy
It'll
it.
cost you
Okay.
a couple of extra bucks,
Hmm.
but it is worth it because you're getting that much more taste of what actually leaves the bodega. So
Right.
Enrama, it's a difficult word to translate. It means raw, basically. It's a branch in Rama. It's a branch. I don't quite know why it's called Enrama, but it is Enrama, and so it's just an added. They realize they're losing what they had in terms of that wonderful taste because it wasn't there in the bottle of Fino when you opened it, in wherever you were drinking it. So it's Enrama.
Okay, well, I'll look for that. It's almost like the floor has, I don't know, maybe it's just imparting more of that umami character of savoriness and
Yeah, yeah,
deliciousness in
yeah,
addition to distinctive aromas. But
yeah, yeah,
now I'm really
yeah.
intrigued. Yeah.
Good,
Okay,
they do.
now you describe Manzanilla as having a whiff of a sea breeze and sophisticated white wines with a nautical attitude. Love that. You explain that the proximity of the sea affects the bodega character, of course. And then you describe the Amontillado as the most satisfying thoroughbred of a wine and say that it is ideal when the nights get longer. What's the difference in both taste and appearance between a true aged Amontillado and the younger medium sherries that are often labeled Amontillados?
Well, you get into a bit of Harrisano kind of rules and regulations here. But if it's a true Amontillado, it'll say Amontillado on the label.
Okay.
And if it has got a slightly sweetened aspect, more of a muscatel in it to sweeten up, then it'll be called medium, which
Hmm.
is an official term from the Consejo Regulador, and it's still like it's saying like 20% of output is medium. So if you if you're looking for the real thing, don't buy medium.
Okay. Oh, all these secret insider tips. That's great.
If you're looking for something we don't worry about too much, and you just want something slightly sweet, then buy medium. It'll also be slightly cheaper.
Okay. And then you write that the Palo Cortado is the mystery sherry born of divine intervention and sheer blending genius, and that only about 1% of all grapes pressed for sherry ever evolved to this style. You enjoyed a glass recently with your former boss at Croft Winery, where you both bottled it in the late 1970s, and you describe it as deliciously quirky and note that it was still totally bone dry over 40 years later. What does this category smell and taste like?
Well, and I can bring you right up to date on that. I did have a glass of Palo Cortado with my ex-Croft boss. I also had a glass with another friend of mine, Hugh Johnson, the wine writer,
Yes, Wine Atlas.
the wine atlas friend of mine. Yesterday for lunch, we had a glass of Palo Cortado each. I had two, I think, and but it's without taking words out of Hugh's mouth. It's really the only sherry that he drinks regularly. Now I'm saying that because that means that Hugh's tasted so many different wines all over the world, has a view on things, but also Liquidine is quite difficult to explain. Why get involved in these wines that are difficult to explain? I just don't know.
Because it's more
But
work and the effort's
it
worth it.
just is, whether it's port or Tokai or sherry. So none of them are straightforward wines. It's so annoying. But there we are. So it is it's uh, they really don't know the genuine palo cortado if the capitality is going down a row of, I don't know, 20, 30 casks, and taste each one regularly, and one cask will for some reason just have not taken off in one direction or another. I mean, absolutely infinite. Could I tell the difference sitting now here talking to you? No, no way. Could I tell the difference in the bodega? Yes, I probably could. And so you get this kind of it's not just it's more dimensional than an Amontillado. It's got another kind of dimension in it, which gives it more body in a way, um, and yet more elegant. I mean, we won't go on, but that's it. But so it is. I would say it's unique in that everything, nothing is unique. But what I would say is that if you want to give somebody a sherry, a bottle of sherry, or a fine wine, which these wines are, then give them a bottle of Palo Cortado. It's kind of like choosing the brand of champagne
Huh.
which you know that is going to import the right kind of brand feelings towards that person. A, you've given, and B, you've got to. I won't get any brands of champagne. We all know brands of champagne, and some are what you might call excessive. Some are slightly, not quite got that. Some are middling, and some are just really those ones you really want to aspire to. And
Right.
Palo Cortado, in terms of one of the six blends that we've been talking about, so it's not a brand as such, but it's a blend. Palo Cortado would occupy the same position as your um,
Prestige
as your
champagnes.
prestige champagne.
Yeah. And is it, I would just expect it's more expensive. Is it like double the price of, say,
No,
a
no,
Fino? Or
no,
no?
no, no,
No?
no, no.
Okay.
It's not more expensive. It's
Wow.
mainly because the demand is there. I mean, it will become more expensive. It has become more expensive over the last 5, 10 years, but not noticeably.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
noticeably.
We,
So yeah.
all right. We will get to price then. So finally, you write that Pedro PX Amenes, okay, is arguably the sherry producer's most valuable Venus asset, and you describe a 1946 PX you tasted as gentle, succulent toffee with gravitas, adding that the senses deepen and bewitch. What is it about PX that makes it so unlike any other sweet wines?
Gosh. Pedro is the grape, and it's a dry grape. But this particular to get the PX blend, the style, the grapes are picked at when they're really ripe and put on esparto mats, sun drenched for 3 or 4 weeks.
It
Um,
sounds like the Amarone method, the drying on the straw
yeah,
mats.
sort of similar.
Okay.
And they've done that for years and years and years, centuries. They've done that for really. Um, so that's what it is, and um, it's ideal with I mean, it's ideal by itself. Wonderful over ice cream.
Mm.
It's the most classic example of something really, really rich. It's decadent.
Ah,
It's wonderfully decadent, and um, it's always been used really historically as an additive. So that's what gets you Bristol cream.
okay. By
Um,
adding PX
by adding PX to
to a
the
regular
Amontillado
version.
or
Oh, the
whatever it is,
Amontillado. Okay,
not
got
necessarily, but
it.
I mean, you're adding PX. Um, and I was involved, as I said earlier, with Croft Original Pearl Cream Sherry. And we then, as a company, and this is back in the 60s, figured how can we take on Harvard's Bristol Cream? And so we added a Muscatel sweet wine, and that's why Croft Original is a lighter colour than Bristol Cream. Because at that stage, our advertising agency said people think it's smart to drink dry. Drinking sweet wine is not good, and it was smart to drink dry, and so therefore people liked the idea of cross original looking dry, in fact tasted sweet. So that's just a bit of brand history.
Hmm.
So that's what PX is really. So it was never really bottled and sold separately. It was kept by bodegas and used, but it didn't really see daylight until about 20, 30 years ago.
Fascinating.
But and again, not expensive.
Right. Okay, so sherry has this long and rich history. You described how Ferdinand Magellan, on setting out to circumnavigate the world in 1519, spent more on sherry than on armaments for the trip. Sir Francis Drake, from the British, took 2,900 barrels of sherry from the Spanish ships in 1587, the equivalent of nearly 2 million bottles. King James I limited, I'm putting that in quotes, limited himself to 64 bottles of sherry a day. Oh my God, I'm surprised the man didn't die of liver failure.
Yeah, that can't be right.
Shakespeare, you write, cited sherry in no fewer than 40 references across 8 of his works. Now, the Elizabethan English term for sherry was sacar, or was sack, rather, S-A-C-K. It's from the Spanish verb sacar, meaning to draw out, which probably refers to the practice of drawing wine from a solera or a cask when it's ready for consumption. And you write that Shakespeare's Falstaff delivers one of the most enthusiastic defenses of sherry ever written, or of wine ever written. And I'll just share that and then we'll jump back in. A good sherry sack ascends me into the brain. I love that. Dries me there all the foolish and dull and curdy vapors which environ it, makes it apprehensive, quick, forgetive, full of nimble, fiery, and delectable shapes, which deliver ode to the voice, the tongue, which is the birth, and becomes excellent wit. But for all that history and cultural elevation and that literature, sherry has had a precipitous decline, which you note. So, at its height, when was that? How much sherry did Spain produce?
Well, at its height, the sherry market, and I've done it in bottles, as we talked about earlier, and it had 200 million bottles of sherry at its height. That's a lot of sherry, and that was famously in 1979. Statistics will show that was when it absolutely reached its height.
Okay. And how does that compare? Yes, today.
Today, we are, and I haven't got the exact figures, but I know that we're south of 50 million bottles.
Wow. Wow.
That's 3/4 of that when it was at its zenith, at its peak,
Right.
have just been wiped out for reasons that we can talk about.
Yes.
So that's why the region has, as it were, retrenched to 7,000 hectares. And I was working out that 15,000 extra hectares is the same size as 2 Manhattans. I mean, not to drink Manhattan, but two Manhattan Islands.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's a huge amount that was pulled up there. So
what do you think was the decline? What was the primary reason, do you think, for the decline? I'm sure there's a confluence, but what would you start with?
Well, I would start with a man, I'm afraid, who called Jose Maria Ruiz Mateos, who almost single-handedly wrecked the sherry industry. What was happening up until then is that sherry kind of had a unique position in England, which is biggest market, because you could keep it in a bottle and leave it there. It wasn't like still wine. So it was the absolutely, every time you met anybody or spoke to somebody or went for an interview, you were invariably given a glass of sherry. The vicar gave you a glass of sherry. It was just before glasses of wine, before sparkling water, before all these sorts of things. So it had a complete monopoly, in quotes, of our drinking habits. Port as well in the UK, but port was a heavier wine, so this is more the latest. So this went on, and the Bristol Cream, Harvard Bristol Cream, was then the biggest wine, selling God knows how many thousands of bottles, but really successful. And this man managed to get a 99-year lease on sole supply of Bristol Cream, which then takes 13, 15 million bottles a year.
So that's Harvey's Bristol Cream. Yeah. Wow.
So armed with that kind of security, he then went on a big spending spree. And he, famously bought 3 banks a day, and he did this, that, and the other, and bought all these companies to on the strength of his collateral, with the supply. Of course, the result was that that the sherry that he was offering became not only under Bristol Cream, but all the other became much less exciting in taste, much more much more boorish, much more bland, and people didn't really want to keep drinking this bland stuff coming out of Spain called sherry. And so that's why it sort of waned completely. 40 years, it's still going down. And, no region could sustain that really without big changes. And one of the things that we see is price. Is that the price of a similar sort of 10-year-old, 20-year-old sherry or port, between sherry and port, roughly port is double the price, or sherry is half the price.
Right.
And that's purely on demand. The cost of
Okay.
production, cost of this and the other. So it's purely on demand.
Huh. So the costs are the same. It's just the demand is
Well, the
flattening the
cost is,
price.
I mean, you'll argue certainly that production costs are higher in the Douro Valley because it's much more complicated and all the rest of it. But basically, the costs of corks and bottles and things are the same. So,
Sure.
I mean, it's just that, unfortunately, the margins aren't there in Jerez at the moment to
Right.
reinvest.
Yeah, wow. So let's go back to that man because he seems like a real character. You describe him really well. So he was the son of a small sherry producer. This Ruiz Mateos became the exclusive supplier to Harvey's of Bristol Cream, best-selling sherry brand in '64. You describe him as a local boy gone bad, ran debts up to 2 billion, over 2 billion euros, and sent the sherry industry into decline. Now, you also said he was a devout Opus Dei adherent, which I think is a division or sect of the Catholic Church, who on business trips used to suddenly stop the car and start to pray. And you quote the saying that circulated in Jerez, where Jesus managed to turn water into wine, Jose Maria succeeded in turning it back again. So this was his low quality, probably perhaps watered down product. But how did someone that colorful and so crooked fool so many serious, sophisticated people for so long?
Well, I mean, again, he went outside the sherry region to Montilla, and that's why he was praying, I think, there and all the rest of it there. But I mean, he was just a real. Um, I mean, we could all think of people in this world today who are, who are doing
Very
not
charismatic, but
very
crooked.
charismatic, not doing very good things.
Some of them are launching IPOs right now in the tech industry. Anyway,
Some of them, we could all think of people in history,
yeah.
but current day, whether it's in the States or whether it's Europe or wherever, who just get away with it. And he got away with it. And Harvey's the company with whom he had this 99-year contract, did see through him, I think 2 or 3 years afterwards, and stopped the sole contract. but he was a manipulator, and he was on a spending spree. The banks would lend him any money against these assets for almost zero interest. There was a minimum price, export price regulation. And he just borrowed money from one. I'm not a financier at all, but he borrowed money from one company and, just moved it around there. And he was just on a spending spree. I mean,
Wow.
you can all, I'm sure we can all think of people alive or in our lifetime who have gone on spending sprees. And they
Sure.
usually, I mean, I think of several right now, and they usually can't resist going for one more
Right.
conquest. And
The
that
one that
usually,
likes the House of Cards collapse, like a Bernie Madoff you've mentioned, a
absolutely,
comparison to him. Yeah.
absolutely. And that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, you can only shuffle it around so long. So after the
Yeah.
Spanish government expropriated his business in 1983, Ruiz Mateos emerged from prison in 1989, formed a political party that won 2 seats in the EU Parliament, and then started a new business which turned out to be a straight up Ponzi scheme again and went bankrupt in 2011. And you wrote that most of Jose Maria's 6 sons are now safely behind bars. At what point did it become clear that the damage to the sherry industry was generational, not just temporary from
Well,
he and
yeah, I
his
think they're
sons?
still there. I mean, I think they're still behind
Ah,
bars.
okay.
I was asking the other day, but I mean, what was, before I answer that question, is that when I mean, I understood vaguely what Ruth Potatoes had done, but it was only when I kind of dug deep that I realized what a a bombshell that he had delivered the sherry industry. And when I said I'm going to write about it, a full chapter to it, people who read got quite nervous. So you mean you're going to write about Ruth Mateus? I said, absolutely, I'm going to write about it. As far as I'm concerned, everything I write is kind of what I hear and backed up. And they almost said you were very brave writing about him in the terms I did. I had no problem about it, but it just shows still the shadow of his
Mm.
legacy. Fortune legacy still hangs just lightly in Jerez there. But I think you could see over time that it was going to be very difficult to get sherry back to where it was.
Hmm.
So I think that it was a sort of dawning aspect that sherry was in a downward spiral. And
Hmm.
of course, the counter argument, the benefit for falling sales means that the stock that you would have been selling each year stays in the bodegas, in the wine cellars,
So it's aging more and more, getting more
aging.
complex. Yes.
And the great thing about sherry is that it couldn't happen to a better wine because actually it will stay happily there for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So gradually this old stock of wine is being sold and moved out. And that's why I say buy it now, not that it's going to increase in value so much, but it just won't be any more of it. So a huge stash of this really fine wine still in the Sherry Triangle. Um,
Wow. Okay.
so
So, yeah, you write that sherry has style in spades and that while fashion comes and goes with each season, style remains. Um, so, and you also write that it's diverse, fulfilling, back in style. Back in style, share with us some examples. Is it making a comeback somehow with a younger generation or cocktails, or is what do you see a resurgence in some respects for sherry?
I wish I could look you in the eyes and say yes, but I really I really think that we're not. We've got glimmers of understanding that the sherries we've been talking about, the six blends, are fine wines. They're world-class wines. And you know, of course, there are some sommeliers who understand this and some restaurateurs. and some wine merchants and all the rest of it there. But in terms of a radical reemergence, I can't see it. I can't see anything sufficiently tangible to say we're on the up. I mean, I'm not that close to it now, but that's my feeling there, and you know, it's up to all of us. If anybody listening or watching likes wine, please just try a bottle of either Enramo, Fino, or Manzanilla. Doesn't really matter which brand, or Palo Cortado, Oloroso, or Amontillado. See what you think.
Mm. What do you think the sherry industry needs to do to start a revival?
Well, gosh, all deep stuff. At its height, the sherry industry was controlled by multinational corporate companies, of which one I worked for was one, because it was a category, a drinks category, that was large and increasing. And then gradually, over the next generation, they all sold out. So all sherry companies, bodegas, producers are now owned by Spaniards. One exception is the man who owns, who's a Filipino, and he owns the Harvey's Fundador brandy brand, but mainly for the brandy, not for the sherry. So they're
Okay.
all really owned by Jerezzanos, and most of them, either they're very small and they just have a stash of really good old sherry, or they've had to diversify into either table wines, Spanish table wines, or into food. Those are two main aspects they've diversified into. So, so in a way, so until somebody or something happens, the margins aren't there, as I said, to reinvest. And without reinvestment, then it's difficult to run about and shout about the brand.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way really is going to start moving is for demand, that actually people do appreciate um, these blends as fine wines, and then gradually it'll come up. I think it will, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we'll ever see the mass-produced sherry that was yesteryear. I think that's history.
Right. Well, and tastes are changing to lighter alcohol wines. The glass of white wine culture you've mentioned. I don't know, maybe there's some hope for a lighter style Fino, which is light in color, to get in on that. I don't know.
No, I don't
Given
know
its.
either. We've tried it, and I think there's several steps that are happening which are positive. One is that sherries, Fino and Manzanilla sherries, can now be seen on wine lists as
Mm-hmm.
as a dry wine,
That's good.
because it is
Okay.
a dry wine. So it's
Right, right.
Spain's
Don't put them in dessert.
finest dry
Yeah.
wine.
Right.
And Peter Sisek, who got this wonderful bodega in Ribera del Duero, he's invested there. And he was saying the other day that it is his main policy, hope, guide, is just to create Spain's finest white wines are in fact Fino, Manzanilla sherry.
Hmm. That's a
So there we
good
are,
strategy.
really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and you note that in 2018, 85% of sherry sales were controlled by six companies, but that simultaneously a wave of boutique bodegas and passionate small producers has emerged, and you call them or you characterize them as a mini gold rush going on in a recently unfashionable wine region. So maybe we'll get these little startup, little garage
I think so.
boutique type producers
I think
too
it's
that
happening,
might.
and people are producing um, dry wines, not sherry, as well. So there's all sorts of things
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm. And if someone, go ahead.
No, just I was just going to say, and I'm biased only because it's such a wonderful place to go and visit.
Yes, that's the question I was going to ask you. If someone wanted to visit, what are your top two tips in getting the most out of a visit to Sherry Jerez?
Gosh, sunshine, flamenco dancing, wonderful horse fairs,
Ah.
bullfighting.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
Seville, a wonderful city.
Mm,
Um, Hilltop towns. There's so much to enjoy about the region. And then when you
right.
filter down to Jerez, or you fly to Seville mainly, and then or Gibraltar and go to Jerez that way, and Puerto and San Luca. Um, I would go and visit a large bodega, Gonzalez Bias, Barbadillo in San Luca, um, and um, and then try and visit a smaller one, Bodegas Tradición for one, um, and various others, and just get
Sure.
immersed. I mean, the tapas, the food
Mm, tapas
is
bars, yeah.
the tapas bars in Jerez are just wonderful. They kind of they the value is tremendous. I mean, it's not expensive, great food, and then of course, if you can time it, that you go to the feria in Jerez, which I've just been to in
What is
May.
that? Feria?
It's a horse feria, and there's one in Seville, one in Sanlúcar, one in Puerto, but the big one is in Jerez de la Frontera. It's a whole week of total celebration, of girls dressed in lovely flamenco dresses, horses and the carriages parading around.
Mm.
Every producer and many others have their own caseta, or kind of bar. Really, you go in and buy the. I think something like half the sherry drunk in Spain is actually consumed at these fairs.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, that
So
sounds
it
lovely.
it closes about sort of midnight, I suppose, and opens again at about 10. And
Hardcore.
it's hardcore. There's just a mass of, but nobody I've ever seen has been what you might call worse for wear. So if you can hit one of those in May, then that just brings the whole thing to life there,
Mm.
so it's worthwhile putting a date in your calendar.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I did want to touch briefly upon Royal Tokai, given your history.
Yes,
Hugh Johnson, author of the Wine Atlas of the World, writes in your sherry book, the foreword, that you launched the most successful Tokai company of all time. The former Hungarian president, Miklos Nemeth, named your five Petunias Azu 1990 and said, "This is the wine I remember while sitting on my grandfather's knee." Lovely. Now, you launched the Royal Tokai Essentia at the 1993 New York Wine Experience. That's hosted, I think, by Wine Spectator magazine. And you saw Marquis Alexandre de Sursalus, the owner of Chateau Yquem, which is the top #1 Bordeaux, also a sweet dessert wine, Sauternes, standing in line, 4 or 5 people deep, glass in hand, waiting to taste your wine. And you write, "We've made it." What did that feel like?
it really was something very special of all my time in this wonderful business, that creating Royal Tokai from nothing, from scratch. I mean, Hugh Johnson had the idea with his friend winemaker Peter Vinning-Diers, also a friend of mine. They had the idea when the Iron Curtain came down, Berlin Wall came down, that to try and see what was going on in Tokai, in northeast of Budapest, about 100 miles northeast of Budapest. And For the last 40 years, everything produced in this, really the original fine wine of Europe was in Tokai.
Mm. This was called
Vineyards,
the Wine of Kings, right? The Tokai.
wine of kings. It was denominated as first growth, second growth, third growth. I got a first growth here by glass, um, in around 1700. So it predates Bordeaux, predates all this sort of thing there. But for the last 40 years, the Russians, controlling Hungary, had milked the whole area, and these wonderful wines of Tokai had been just volume orientated, in fact, not quality at all, quantity. and it all went to Russia, and this great thing was lost there. So we came in. It's a long story, and I'll be brief as I can, but to me, it was the most fascinating part of my career, I suppose, was um, Hugh Johnson and Peter Vinny were already out there. They'd already established a joint venture with 100 hectares, and that was fine, but they'd run out of money. I have been working with Lord Rothschild, Jacob Rothschild. It was a
Of
wonderful
the Bordeaux fame?
philanthropist of Bordeaux fame, indeed, Lord Rothschild. And anyway, and he had a Hungarian aunt, and he wanted me to go out and buy vineyard in Tokai. So I went out there, anyway, joined forces with Peter and Hugh, um, and we formed the company. We raised more money, formed the company, and called the Royal Tokai Wine Company. Hugh wanted to be called the Imperial Tokai Wine Company, and they all said, "No, no, Mr. Johnson, we're not. We're not an empire. We're a kingdom." So Hugh said, "Right, let's call it the Royal Tokai Wine Company," and that's how it became the Royal Tokai Wine Company,
That's great.
named after all the king's things. But that was something very, very special because literally no privately produced Tokai had been exported for 40 years.
Hmm.
There was no
Wow.
market, there was no brand, there was no pricing. Like starting out with your first ever champagne company or your first ever Bordeaux chateau. I mean, just extraordinary. And that's exactly that. So and Peter produces amazing blends of Azu wine, which is another complicated production. Anyway, it's Azu sweet wine, and and we just didn't know if it was, as it were, we were on the right lines. That this was the original Tokai Azu wines of 40 years, centuries ago. So we took it round the place, and we took it to. You're right, Prime Minister Nemeth. We tracked down London. Yes, he said. I took it to the manager of the Four Seasons Hotel in New York, who was Hungarian. He said, "This is unbelievable. We never thought we'd see this wine ever again.
Wow.
This fiery wine." Um, I took it to Peter Morel in New York,
Famous
um,
merchant?
the famous merchant, old friend, and he went berserk about it. And anyway, so that's how that was simply just taking a bottle around the world. So
Yeah.
yes,
No,
that
that's
was pretty
great.
special.
And
And
just a
it is
brief
now
overview.
having
Hmm.
sorry,
Go ahead.
the Carol.
Uh-huh. And just a brief overview, Tokai wines from Hungary's is it Tokai region? Tokaj region?
Yes,
Are
Tokai,
either
Tokai, yeah,
Tokai, okay, are
Tokai.
either dry whites or sweet wines, and ferment is the dominant grape, prized for its high acidity and aging potential. As you is the flagship style of Tokai, a concentrated sweet botrytis affected wine, meaning the noble rot, the good kind of rot that concentrates the grape sugars. High acidity flavors from the grapes are harvested one at a time by hand. There's a couple of other categories. We really need to dedicate, I think, an entire episode to Tokai, but I'm shoving it in here at the end because you have such a strong association with it. But you talk about just the one question I keep having is 5 petunias. What does that mean? Petunia, is that just the degree of sweetness?
Yes and no. A good politician's answer. A Petonio or Putani originally was a wooden uh, um, sort cask that you carried on your back, and you filled the word look at the cask with grapes. So once
Okay.
you'd filled a Petonio, um, you then emptied it, figuratively speaking, into a barrel of dry white wine.
Okay.
So you've got
Okay.
your barrel of dry white wine, and then you've got the juice from these very very sweet grapes. Um, so if you added one Petunia, it becomes sort of gently sweet. If you added two, more so, three, more so, four, more so, five, classic, six is which I've got one here. Six is the ultimate. So they've now reorganized, and so the different levels basically there were three, four, and five petunias originally under the state. Now it's really the market settled on five and six petunias.
Okay.
So which
And
means that roughly 50% of the content of your glass is made up from the Azu wines and 50% from dry white wine. So it's
and how
different from Sauternes.
yeah, that's why I was going to ask you. How would you compare it?
Well, Sauternes is just one grape and goes through the process, whereas here we have two grapes going through, as it were, the fermentation process.
Okay.
So that's the difference there. So we have
Okay.
more, Royal Sky has more acidity, almost double the acidity to Sauternes, but with less alcohol.
Okay. Okay.
So
And
there's
some of the flavors are the same, like the apricot, peach, that kind of
absolutely,
flavor? Yes.
you get
Okay.
this. I've upgraded myself to a first growth here. A first growth meshes my great first growth, and that in Magyar in Hungarian means honeycomb.
Honeycomb.
So
Lovely.
honeycomb. So that's kind of what you're getting here. Um,
That sounds so good. Wow. Okay.
it really is. And if you haven't tried, you really just need to try. Go for five petunias.
Five.
And
Okay.
Royal Tokai, we started out being the smallest because a lot of other large people put money in, but we've now, over sort of 20 or so years, we've now, um, I think, pretty much the brand leader.
Oh,
So do please
congrats.
have a
Yes.
look. Contact Wilson Daniels.
Absolutely.
They'll supply, or in Canada, well,
Okay.
whoever,
Okay.
in the
Terrific.
liquor vault.
Sounds good. Okay. Ben, time has flown. Is there anything that you wanted to mention as we wrap up that we haven't covered yet?
Gosh, I mean, I think all I would try and say is that wine is fun. Wine should be fun, and I think people should, consumers, you and me, uh, not get too serious about it. I think we should, and I enjoy bottled. It's like going to your favorite restaurants. You want to go to your favorite wines. They kind of talk to you, belong to you, and so of course try different things. But if you like one particular thing, stick with it. Stick to your favorite
Yes.
restaurant there. So, I mean, yes, lots of just keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep going. I love that. I'm really inspired to try sherry and your Tokai. So I believe I've had your Tokai, or at least I know I've tried Tokai before, but I've got to get back to sherry because I just have that image too. I know I've tasted Fino and Manzanilla, and I should know better, but my perception is still fortified, end of the meal. I'm full.
That's the thing. Whereas exactly,
Yeah,
I know. Whereas of course,
yeah.
but both these two, and I've got these two here, ridiculously, um, almost identical colour, with the sherries on the left,
Ah,
the Tokais on the right,
right,
which is
right.
pretty by chance. But no, that's the great thing. Fortified is such a was such a plus word, and now it's become such a negative word in many people's minds. Port's fortified, and they wish they could not call it fortified.
Right.
Sherry, but the key thing is do try Enrama, Fino Enrama,
Yes. I'm gonna look for that.
any good merchant would have one. Doesn't matter really which particular brand. And I just think you get that add-on flavour of floor, which is kind of
Sure.
makes it all make sense.
Yep.
And royalty guys
Okay.
start with the five petunias and have it with pudding. I mean, have it with
Sure.
dessert. Have it with
Dessert. Yeah.
chocolate. Have it with chocolate. No, don't wait to the end. And
No.
just drink sherry and Tokai and normal white wine glasses. Don't go for special glasses.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
industry is very keen with all the Tokai port and sherry is not to treat it, as it were, sort of separate as an add-on. As you say, after
Sure.
dinner. Do people want one? No, they've got to drive. They've got to go somewhere. Just treat it as
Yeah.
normal wine.
Okay, then.
Normal wine.
All right, Ben. Well, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for all the stories and tips and really opening my mind to the world of sherry and giving me a taste of Tokai. I want to follow up on that as well. Don't
Good.
log off just yet, but I will
Okay.
say thank you. And I hope next time we can raise a glass in person.
Indeed. In Jerez.
In Jerez, that's right. That's the appointment. Okay. All right. Thanks so
Good.
much, Ben.
Thank you very
All
much,
right.
Natalie. Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.